Imagine being confined to a tight space, just 8 feet wide by 10 feet long, by yourself for 23 hours a day. It's hard to fathom the impact of that kind of isolation. But the new Frontline documentary Solitary Nation provides a glimpse into the prison system that few ever see. As the documentary Solitary Nation opens, you'd think you were listening to a wolf, not a human. One of the most surprising things Frontline found is how noisy it is in Solitary. Never quiet, not even for a moment. Frontline staked out this maximum security solitary confinement unit, getting unprecedented pictures of the practice of fishing, passing stuff between cells, and hearing firsthand from some inmates.
Can't conduct yourself like a human being when they treat you like an animal.
That solitary treatment is now under scrutiny. In February, a Senate Judiciary Committee heard firsthand testimony from people who had spent time in solitary, including one inmate who was later cleared by DNA.
I would like to believe that the vast majority of the people in the United States would be appalled if they knew what we are doing to inmates in solitary confinement and understood that we are torturing them.
Piper Kerman, author of the book Orange is the New Black, who spent 13 months in a federal prison, said solitary is a constant fear and threat to women in prison.
Solitary is also misused as a threat to intimidate and silence women who are being sexually abused by staff, which is a widespread problem in prisons.
During that same hearing, Minnesota Senator Al Franken pressed Federal Bureau of Prisons Chief Charles Samuels to tell him the size of an average solitary cell. He could not do it.
How big is a cell?
Say the average size?
How big is the cell?
You're looking for the space?
The size of the cell that a person is kept in. I want to get some idea of, I don't know, am I asking this wrong?
Between reform schools and a lengthy prison term, my first guest spent about 2/3 of his life locked up. Robert DeLello entered Walpole State Prison in 1964 after he was convicted of manslaughter. He was released in 2003 when his sentence was overturned. Thanks for joining us, Robert. So I know you said it's impossible to describe solitary in just a few minutes, but give us a sense of it.
What you have to grab on the concept is when you're looking at solitary confinement, you're looking at insanity. If you attempt to make logical, rational sense out of it, it gets totally blurred. What's going on in these type of situations is mind-boggling and criminal. Individuals are going from solitary confinement directly into the street, and heinous crimes are being committed. You go crazy in there. I went crazy back and forth a couple of times. To this day, I wake up every 45 minutes to an hour because of the slamming of the door all night long and then making rounds.
Were you put in solitary for punitive measures, or were you just put in there when you first went in?
I escaped from Oak Colony Correctional Center, and I got sentenced to DDU for 5 years. Wow. And while I was in there, I lost a month, because they found some contraband in my cell. But the thing is, the way, it's a caustic, toxic environment that not only affects prisoners, it affects guards, and it affects the administration that has to lie to cover up what they're doing to human beings. It's really a disaster. I wish you could get inside to see.
Well, we have someone who did, and he's sitting here right here with me. Dan Edge, he's a documentary filmmaker who directed Frontline's new feature, Solitary Nation. Welcome to you, Dan. First of all, I meant to say this was a maximum security prison in Maine, and you said it took a long time for you to get permission. Why was Maine open to the idea of you allowing to film in there?
I think they were open to the idea because they were sort of ahead of the game nationally on this issue. They started to look at their use or perhaps misuse of solitary confinement a few years ago. And then, in a way, I think we were given access because both the commissioner of the system and also the warden of that specific prison were very keen that we have a national conversation about this issue. There is a growing debate about the misuse of solitary confinement, but it's a debate which is taking place in an information vacuum. Very few people know what it's like to be in solitary confinement. Very few people know what it's like to work in a maximum security prison in one of those units. And so what we set out to do at Frontline was to fill that void.
You witnessed something known as phishing, and I want to put up a little video of this. Just describe what's happening here.
Well, the inmates have very little in their cells. In fact, some of them have nothing at all in their cells because they're being punished for a specific infraction. So they quite ingeniously, actually, will make these little fishing lines out of their unwinding their blankets or their clothes, and they'll pass contraband to each other. It'll be notes, or it could be newspapers. It could be razor blades. It could be narcotics smuggled down into the unit when people first arrive down there. There's a whole economy in this unit.
And you said you had to wait a long time to set that up to see.
Yeah, I mean, we were filming on the unit for months, and often I would just sit there with my camera on the floor of the corridor for hours at a time. But our way of operating was to try and become invisible to both the officers and the inmates.
So these guys have nothing in their cells, no TV, no books, nothing. There's nothing to do.
There's no TVs in this unit. Many of the inmates will have some books.
Yeah.
But if you misbehave in solitary, and many inmates do misbehave because, in large part, because they can't cope. They cannot cope with the environment. Then they're sort of back to square one. They'll be put in a cell with nothing but what they call a turtle suit. It's just a smock, no possessions, nothing at all to do.
And misbehaving is a very loose term. You know, it depends upon what the attitude is of the guard toward the inmate. Yeah. I don't like you.
Right. Is there any time that you can think solitary is justified?
Yes, but it's got to be qualified. An individual that's stabbing guards or stabbing prisoners, he can't be allowed to run around the prison stabbing people. But he shouldn't be put in solitary for years on end. I mean, the guy needs treatment, he needs help. He doesn't need to be made more crazier than he already is and then put back out into population.
You know, I know you're focusing on solitary, but I mean, is there just a bigger issue here, which is the way we house criminals in the first place, the whole cell notion, everything about it?
I think you put your finger on it in a sense that the solitary confinement issue is a distillation of the wider prison problem. You know, if we have these institutions which are essentially supposed to be keeping us safe. That's what prison is for, one could argue. And if the process of going through these institutions makes people more dangerous, more unstable, more damaged, then something has gone wrong. You know, we all lose.
And the thing is this, we know how to rehabilitate prisoners. We know how to do it. It's not really a problem. The problem is the Department of Corrections doesn't have a vested interest in rehabilitating prisoners. Job security is what controls it. Prisons are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They shouldn't be. They should be getting smaller and smaller. We can take and rehabilitate a person and make him a law-abiding, productive citizen. Myself, for example, if it showed a sign of life on the street, I would put a gun on it and rob it. I lasted maybe 3 months on the street. I have now been on the street over 10 years. And no conflicts with law and whatnot. I became a certified paralegal.
And you've been a prisoner's rights advocate. Robert DiLello and Dan Edge, thanks for joining us.